everybody now? Made you laugh.
This guy, front row seat here.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Austin City Council District 6 Candidate Forum, sponsored by the Austin Ethics Review Commission and moderated by the League of Women Voters in the Austin area. Pastor Josh Robinson would like to personally welcome you all tonight.
We welcome you here to Hope Presbyterian Church. Hope has been here in the community for 40 years, and we are proud to have such a relationship with the neighborhood and the community, and a place to be able to provide a place where forums like this can happen, where we can engage each other and listen and know how we can move forward within our community here. So we welcome. One of the most important things you may need to know this evening is that through these doors are the restrooms. And if you need anything or have any questions, I'll be in the back and be happy to serve you. Welcome. Glad you're here.
Thank you very much. I'm Carol Eckelkamp with the Austin Area League of Women Voters. The League was formed out of the suffragette movement to give women the vote in 1920. It is now celebrating its 94th year. We are a nonpartisan political organization with both men and women, members who promote the informed and active participation of citizens in our government. The League does not support or oppose candidates or parties. The League members who are helping tonight are up here at our timetable. We have Mary and Lauren. We have Cindy and Francis asking questions this evening. And we have 4 members in the back. And we have our voter registration that will be able to help you also if you need to register to vote. The deadline for voters registration is October the 11th. And they will also help you if you need to change your address rather than doing it in line at the polls this coming election period. I'm going to talk slow because Mr. Flannigan is in Austin traffic. And so he is just, he's a few minutes away. So we're going to just go slower than normal for our introductory. Don't laugh because you all might be sitting in traffic in a minute going home. We are pleased to have you all here with us this evening. And this forum is being televised live on ATXN, and it is recorded. Go to www.austintexas.gov/ATXN or to our site at www.lwv, League of Women Voters, lwvaustin.org for all the forum dates, and you will be able to view these recorded forums from their archives. On the back table, there are 3x5 cards if any of you in the audience would like to submit a question. You may also email questions for the following forums to forum@lwvaustin.org. The League will review the questions and ask if time permits. Please understand that we only have so much time. Normally with 2 candidates, we can get in about 10 to 11 questions. So we do welcome input from the public. We gather these questions up. I think we've been working on these for about 90 days. And so we gather questions that hopefully these questions are sometimes district specific, but because our candidates are asking to lead all of us in the city, oftentimes they are citywide. And the purpose of all of our questions are to help you decide and determine the differences in the candidates. So that's what we go through as a league when we start formulating these questions, is what questions will better show the differences in the candidates to better inform you, because inform and educate is what we do as a league. And so sometimes you may want a specific question asked and it may be a little too specific. The candidate. You are seated in ballot order tonight, and as we rotate who answers the question first. The format tonight will be as follows: 2 minutes for opening and closing statements, and 2 minutes for each question. Our timekeeper will hold up the cards. We ask you to keep your eyes on the timekeeper. All the questions originated from the league with input from the public, and they are unknown to any candidate before the question is asked. Before we begin, please let me state that the views expressed here and these of the candidates are not the sponsor, the Ethics Review Commission, or the moderator, the League of Women Voters in the Austin area. According to the guidelines of the League of Women Voters, there must be no applause or demonstration of support or opposition from visitors to this room. Candidates are asked to refrain from any personal attacks on their opponents. Welcome, candidates, plural. And I will just, welcome. I will just reiterate, for Mr. Flannigan, if you have a seat, both of you please have a seat. And just going to reiterate how the format is tonight, that it is very similar to our other forums, and we will have a 2-minute opening and closing statements. They're each 2 minutes, and then each question is 2 minutes. You will be asked the same question. And remember that you are in ballot order, and we will rotate who begins the questions. So, welcome candidates, and Mr. Flannigan, you are first up on the ballot, so you will be able to give your 2-minute opening statement, and I do ask that you show the time cards. We do ask that you pay attention to the time cards. You're only going to get a minute warning. You're halfway through, and then you'll get a 30-second, and then you'll get a hard red stop. So we appreciate it. Appreciate you both being here tonight. Thank you very much.
Thank you all. My name is Jimmy Flannigan. I am running for Austin City Council in District 6. I want to apologize for my lateness. I was stuck in traffic. I'm sure that's nothing you all have experienced before, but it's certainly something that affected me tonight. I want to thank the League of Women Voters for hosting this tonight. It was a lot of fun doing these forums in 2014, and I'm glad to have the opportunity to speak to all my District 6 constituents here tonight. I've lived in District 6, or I lived in Northwest Austin for 16 years. I've been in Austin for 20 years, came here to go to UT back in '96, started my small business out of my dorm room building websites, which I still do today. Moved out to Northwest Austin 16 years ago, even before 183 was a highway, before much of us were even in the city of Austin. So I've seen this part of town grow up around me. After 10-1 passed, I formed a community group called Northwest Austin Coalition, bring issue experts out of downtown and up into our district so they could see what was going on out here. And through that group, we kicked off the first ever citizen-led corridor study for Anderson Mill Road, which should save taxpayers about $1 million, and it got that road included in Mayor Adler's transportation bond. It's the type of collaborative, citizen-led effort that I lead with, the type of work I want to do for the city, the type of work I want my council office, my future council office, to do. But it's also about ending the wastefulness of governance by lawsuit, the embarrassment of attacking kids, clergy, and constituents, and the failure of our voices being silenced through abstentions and false promises. There are solutions to the problems that we face in Austin. They are not going to be easy, but together we can fix them. My name is Jimmy Flannigan. I am running to be your city council member, and I believe that we can fix Austin together.
Mr. Zimmerman.
Thank you. Again, I want to thank everyone for being here, and thank you to the church and League of Women Voters. I dropped a $5 bill in the little bucket in the back. Donations are appreciated here, and I'd appreciate if you join me in supporting the League of Women Voters with a small donation. I've had the pleasure of serving you for a year and a half as your Austin City Council member. The job has been mostly what I expected, with two exceptions. The problems in city government are much worse than I imagined. And I also didn't understand about how much media attention would be put on the new 10-1 City Council, but I'm obviously pleased because a lot more people are informed. For those that don't know, I'm a fifth-generation Texan from San Antonio. My mom is in the Daughters of the Republic of Texas. I went to Texas A&M. I got 2 engineering degrees in '84 and '86, mechanical engineering. Now, what that means is that I'm certifiably half as smart as the average Aggie if you have 2 degrees, all right? But I'm smart enough to know that constituents really don't have a voice in the downtown government. The problem I face for the most part is a lot of misinformation by the city bureaucracy, instances where the city is violating the law aggressively. And I've got 3 little handouts I want you to take a look at. We had about 50 copies here. The first one is a budget detail I'd like you to look at. These are examples of the misinformation we get from bureaucrats. If you look at page 575, it looks like the reclaimed water is profiting $2 million a year. If you look at page 586, it looks like you're losing $2.4 million per year. The other map I want to show you, my opponent has criticized me for a road project that was submitted by the City of Austin back in 1984. That's what this one is. The city also forced you to pay for a 150-acre park that is now physically inaccessible. A lot of you don't know this park exists, but it does. And finally, here's a letter of intimidation from an Austin city lawyer trying to silence me for showing up to help my constituent. I'm Don Zimmerman. I appreciate your vote.
Mr. Zimmerman, I assume that those handouts are outside this room.
Thank you for the clarification, but these handouts are not campaign material. They're factual information.
They should be outside this room. They should be in the hall.
I thought they should be inside the room. The campaign material is this one right here,
Mr. Zimmerman,
and that's outside.
those are the league rules.
Well, the league rules said campaign information. This is not campaign information. These are factual documents.
It is related to your campaign. Would you please see that they are outside the door?
Wow.
They can be out in the hall.
I'm sorry, this is public information by the City of
argue with
Austin.
you.
They're not campaign materials.
I'm not going to argue with you.
Yeah, I can't argue with you either. Thank you.
Since we started with Mr. Flannigan on the opening statements, Mr. Zimmerman, here's the first question. In a rapidly growing city like Austin, keeping up with infrastructure demands can be challenging for a city. Roads and bridges, water supply and purification, storm systems, sewage treatments, etc. What are the infrastructure needs of the city, and what, if any, of our infrastructure is in need of repair and upgrade? Is the city doing a good job keeping up with the demands imposed by our rapid population growth in District 6? Please explain.
The short answer is no, and since I only have 2 minutes, I'm going to focus on the most critical of our problems, which of course is the traffic quagmire, which slowed down my opponent, but it slows down all of us. The important thing to realize here is the City of Austin has a traffic department. They have a lot of highly qualified civil engineers. I've had some of them come out to our town hall meetings that we've held quite a few of. And I was frankly quite surprised at the level of understanding that our bureaucracy has about the traffic quagmire. Mr. Flannigan, my opponent, pretends that his Northwest Austin Coalition's done some kind of study to help the process. That is nonsense. The Austin Traffic Department engineers have forgotten more than my opponent knows about traffic congestion. The problem is agenda. The agenda of this city is to not build roads for 2 dumb ideas. One, they thought it would stop people from moving here. Crazy idea. The second reason they like traffic congestion is it supports a political agenda of trying to herd you into highly dense population centers like downtown and a high-rise apartment. So there's a political agenda in this city promoted by the staff to use traffic congestion to change your behavior. This is the most important thing you need to know about what's going on in the city. They're using traffic congestion for social engineering. So our most desperate need is for traffic congestion relief. We need a freeway in the western part of the city to connect SH 45 at Lakeline Mall. That needs to go all the way down to Buda, to I-35. And my opponent will be strongly opposed to that because, in fact, he's going to represent insects and salamanders. I'm going to represent voters and commuters. So I ask for your vote because I'm going to focus the next 4 years on getting road expansions done here in Travis County and West Austin.
We have asked that you all not talk about each other or their campaigns. Just answer the questions which are about issues.
My
Thank
apologies. In the opening comments, my opponent said he had constituents and he doesn't.
That's the reason I'm addressing it to both people.
Not.
Thank you. Mr. Flannigan, would you like for me to reread the question?
No, that's okay. I'm fully versed in the infrastructure challenges that the city faces right now. And the corridor study that I did with the Northwest Austin Coalition, where we had hundreds of residents collaborate on the challenges that we face on Anderson Mill Road and the accidents that, if you haven't been in one yourself, you have a friend who's been in an accident on Anderson Mill Road, and the community leaders who have kids who are disabled, who need pedestrian access to Anderson Mill Road. We had hundreds of people participate in a corridor study that had never occurred on Anderson Mill Road before. And when I brought that study to city staff and to the mayor's office, they got the road included in the bond. That is a fact. That is a fact. And that type of money-saving, fiscally responsible corridor study is the type of work I want to bring to some of our other neglected roadways in District 6, like Duval Road, McNeil, Lakeline Boulevard with that ridiculous 4-lane to 2-lane things that goes up to the train station. There are serious needs in our district, and it's not enough to just yell and scream about city staff and pretend that they're going to get fixed. The real work of fixing infrastructure is about making the hard decisions about the budget, not abstaining when you're given an opportunity to fix those challenges, and using the resources we have in our district to get those projects done cheaper and faster. That's exactly the work I did with the Northwest Austin Coalition. It's why Anderson Mill Road got $5.5 million in Mayor Adler's transportation bond that you all will have a chance to vote on in November. And it's the work I want to bring to the rest of the problems in this district, traffic, utility bills, property crime, through this type of citizen-led collaborative effort.
Okay, we'll start with Mr. Flannigan. The recent Austin Community Policing Report recommended major changes in APD's district representative program, which creates liaisons between APD and the communities that they serve. One of those recommendations includes reassigning 11 of the sworn officers assigned to district representative positions to patrol operations and replacing those officers with 12 civilian community service officers. What is your view on APD's community policing efforts and the proposed changes, and please explain.
I read the Matrix report that covered the issues and challenges with implementing community policing. I read that cover to cover. It asks for a considerable increase in the staff at APD, but there's something specific about that that's relevant to our district. I've been talking about for months, and you may have read a Statesman story about the value of expanding the civilian staff at the police department. The biggest property crime that we face in District 6 is people leaving their doors unlocked. And I don't need an armed, highly trained, badged officer to remind folks to lock their doors. And if we can remember to lock our doors, then those highly trained, expensive, badged officers don't have to drive an hour from the Palmer Lane substation over to take the report. They can do the actual work that they want to be doing, the patrol work, the community engagement work with other parts of the city. This is one of those special areas where District 6 has a unique issue. We have a property crime issue that some parts of town don't face. We can solve that problem by being better stewards of our community, by being better stewards of the money that APD spends. And I think it's important to remember, the police department budget is the largest single general fund department, the largest, $400 million out of almost $1 billion. And when the Public Safety Committee does not do the hard work of breaking down that number, and the people who lead the public safety community would rather talk about fluoride or coyote traps, that is not being a good steward of our taxpayer dollars when you had an opportunity to really investigate the best way to grow and to provide public safety to both District 6 and the rest of town. And other parts of town face different challenges, and we have to be smart about how we provide the resources to get those challenges addressed.
Mr. Zimmerman.
Thank you. So the issue of community policing has been on the table for some time. I also read the study, of course, as the chair of the Public Safety Committee. It's common sense that it would make sense to get uniformed and highly trained officers and well-paid officers from behind a desk, right? Everybody that's got a badge and a gun, of course it makes some common sense to get people back out from behind the desk and get them out doing their real job, and everybody supports that. That's a common sense notion. The problem with the report that my opponent referred to is it was supposed to be done to define community policing. Now, your city council pretty much unanimously agreed that this report did not define community policing. And in fact, the 12 officers that were requested by APD were denied. Your city council denied APD the officers that they said they were going to use for community policing because the report failed to accurately detail what the metrics would be and what the purpose of community policing would be. We had some discussions about this on my committee. A year ago, I suggested to APD, and I have some support on the council for this, that community policing ought to be solving property crimes. We have an abysmal property crime rate solution of around 14 or 15%. Now, APD says, well, that's the national average. I say that's abysmal. That is ridiculous that you have an 85% chance of getting away with a property crime. And so my point was to say, look, you can formulate a policy that says we're going to hire additional officers that are going to actually investigate and try to resolve property crimes. You know what that's going to do? That's going to engage APD with the community for the purpose of solving property crimes. That builds relationships, that gets APD familiar with the people in the community experiencing problems. And so that's what we're asking for. So the Austin City Council stood with me in not giving the APD those officers because they did not define community policing.
Thank you.
Mr. Flannigan, with the $720 million mobility bond package, which includes funding for corridor mobility, such as adding arterial roads and corridor improvements, local mobility that would fund non-automobile road users, pedestrians and cyclists, and regional mobility that addresses congestion and enhances safety. Are you satisfied that this will solve much of our city's congestion and help move people through the city easier? Please explain.
Well, I don't think the bond is perfect, but I do think we need to vote for it. And when I watched all of the council work sessions that the mayor led to try and pull this bond together, it became very clear that we were trying to make up a deficit of infrastructure spending that we have neglected to do over the last few years. This is not going to be the solution for the future. This is about at least getting caught up in some of our major congested roadways. And the projects that are being proposed on Burnett and Airport and Guadalupe and North Lamar and some of those corridors are decidedly different from the type of work we want to do on Anderson Mill Road, Palmer Lane, and 2222 at 620. And they've divided those roads out into regional roads where we're concerned about commuter traffic and pedestrian safety compared to the corridor roads where they're looking at more dense mixed-use development and neighborhood development and the type of work that's going to happen on those corridors. And those corridors were developed not in a bubble. They were done over multiple years of neighborhood group meetings at an extreme cost to the city, a cost that my Anderson Mill corridor study does not have because we did it ourselves for zero cost. But those projects have been vetted by the neighborhoods that abut those corridors. And so I think as we think about what is it going to take to address congestion, to have traffic solutions, to have a city where there is mobility for all people at all ages and all walks of life, we have to at least get back to even. And this mobility bond, while a big one, is necessary. And whether or not you're going to vote yes or you're going to vote no, you're going to vote. And I think it's important to remember that abstaining on a $720 million decision is not an appropriate way to lead how we're going to fix traffic. You either like it or you don't like it. You're going to vote yes or you're going to vote no. And I vote yes.
Mr. Zimmerman.
Thank you. So I serve on the Mobility Committee, which is chaired by Councilmember Ann Kitchen. I think it's important for you to know that Councilmember Kitchen and myself were not even notified that there was going to be a public press release about the $720 million bond package. I want you to let that sink in a little bit as an illustration how the city bureaucrats run this city. Your elected city council members that serve on the Mobility Committee were not notified that there was going to be a big announcement about a $720 million bond package. That should give you pause. The second point I want to make is the only person who voted against bringing this bond issue was Councilmember Garza. Councilmember Garza voted no. And the reason she voted no is because the package that was put together underserves District 2. The reason we have about $30 million allocated to District 6. Stop? Oh, sorry. The time warp there. So the reason we have $30 million in District 6, frankly, is because how many people remember the downtown civil courthouse bond, boondoggle, last November? Yeah, quite a few people voted against that. For everybody who voted against that bond, thank you, because you gave me the personal credibility to force the bureaucrats to put $30 million into District 6. So I abstained from this bond because I made it clear that I wanted ballot language that would tell us something about the cost of the bond. The council voted 6-5 to put some kind of cost limitation into the ballot language. The city lawyers lobbied to take it out. I was infuriated by that. There was supposed to be some language limiting the tax increase. The city lawyers got it kicked out, and that's why I abstained. So as far as the bond, it's not bad for District 6. It's pretty good for District 10 and Loop 360. But overall, I don't think it's a good deal for the city at large.
Okay, the next question goes to Mr. Zimmerman. The areas in and around District 6 contain some of the most extraordinary environmental assets in all of Texas. These assets are magnets for people who want to live, work, and play here. As this results in increased urban traffic congestion, how would you address the traffic problems in light of the inherent transportation and environmental conflicts?
It's a great question, and I have a straightforward answer to this. The property that you have paid for that now makes up BCP and these other open spaces, this is very important to understand. That property is your property. It does not belong to city bureaucrats. It does not belong to the salamanders. It doesn't belong to the golden cheek warbler. It belongs to you. And in my view, you have a right to use a 250-foot wide easement or whatever it is that suits your purpose to have congestion relief. I've had many conversations, and we've had some town hall meetings inviting TxDOT engineers. They've talked to us about their 620 corridor study, which is a real corridor study, not a fake study. It's a real study. And they show that there's really not enough right-of-way to fix the 620 traffic congestion problems. We are going to have to find additional right-of-way to fix the traffic congestion problem in the western part of the city. So I think this is a very bright line of distinction between my opponent and me. I support using our land to have an easement that we can use. We have plenty of smart engineers that know how to build freeways that are environmentally sensitive. This can be done. It costs a little more, but it can be done, and it must be done.
Mr. Flannigan.
Well, I want to correct some mistakes. It was Councilmember Houston who voted no on the transportation bond, not Councilmember Garza. Councilmember Garza abstained. And abstentions are not leadership, and I want to be clear that abstentions are not leadership. Now, when we talk about building roads and the interface with the environmental protection areas of our region, there has been a road proposed that would cut right through the canyon lands, that would connect Spicewood Springs Road to 2222. This road is not just an expensive boondoggle, but it would increase the risk of wildfires through the canyonlands because it would introduce more human interaction with all those green spaces. And unless someone is proposing that we turn all of the canyonlands into apartments as well, which has been proposed by some in the past, this is not an appropriate way to solve any traffic problem. Now, that's not to say that there aren't roads that need to get built. When I heard that the 3M land over on 2222 was going to be up for sale, I immediately contacted the Transportation Department and the Mayor's office to get a road built that connects the 4 Points Middle School and the Vandergrift High School back up to 620, because going through the 3M property is how you do it without having to fight the federal government, who, yes, we are the federal government, but it's the federal government that's going to make its decision on the BCP, not the City of Austin. And the Mayor's office and the Transportation Department are already working with me on this. They are working with me because the only way we are going to get these problems solved is if we work together. We cannot grandstand, we cannot attack, we cannot accuse, because if you read the Statesman article a couple of months ago or last month, Councilmember Garza made it clear when someone does that, they are ignored. They are ignored. And it doesn't matter how right or wrong you might be, you are ignored. The only way we're going to fix the problems that we face in this district and that we face as a city is by working together.
Mr. Flannigan, City Council increased the minimum wage for the City of Austin employees to $13.03 per hour last October. Recently, nearly 100 activists marched from Austin City Hall to the state capitol calling for a $15 minimum wage and a union that would increase their opportunity to collectively negotiate with employers. Do you consider a $13.03 per hour a livable wage in Austin, and what is your position on unionizing a labor force?
Well, I think it's important to remember the areas in which the city has authority. And setting a minimum wage or a living wage of 13 and change, I think there's a proposal that might be $13.50. It was important for the city to do that. It's the reason why the Springwoods pool was the last to open, because they couldn't get lifeguards at the lower wage. So livable wage or not, this was about supply and demand, the supply and demand of labor. And we needed to pay a wage that was going to allow us to staff these low wage positions so we could provide the services that the city needs to provide. As far as $15 minimum wage, that's a decision for a higher pay grade than mine. City is not allowed to implement a minimum wage of any kind on private employers. And I support unionization for workers when they are able to do it.
Thank you. Mr. Zimmerman.
So as far as unionization, we are a right-to-work state. I support everyone's right to join a union, and I support their right to not be forced to join a union. It should be a matter of free choice whether you join a union or not. As far as the livable wage, we've had quite a bit of discussion on this. I've had some discussions with Councilmember Kassar and even in the hallways, not just on the dais. I said, can you tell me, what does livable wage mean? You know, I assert that there are as many definitions of livable wage as there are people. It is impossible to accurately define a limited wage. It's a fool's errand. As far as what people are worth for their skills and their experience, that really is a market question. It's not a question for the government. I don't think the government's qualified to say how much you're worth, and when the government sets these arbitrary base wages or minimum wages, what they do is they discriminate against younger people and people that are just starting out that don't have skills. So basically what the government does with this crazy idea that it knows what a livable wage should do, they put people out of work. None of the government's business to try to decide or define what a livable wage is because they cannot define it. So again, I support choice when it comes to being a union or not. And I don't support the livable wage because it makes no sense and can't be defined.
Thank you. Mr. Zimmerman, what do you see as the biggest challenge of working with the Austin Independent School District when it comes to funding programs? Is there a challenge District 6 faces with its schools and programs serving its families?
So let's talk about the school districts quickly. I am going to be looking into statutes that deal with how this commingling of funds can take place. I'm concerned that the City of Austin is already breaking the law. The City of Austin is not a school, it's a municipality. The Austin Independent School District is not a city, it's a school, and it's supposed to be educated. It's supposed to be educating kids. These need to be distinct roles. Do you want the Austin Independent School District building a road? You don't want the City of Austin building a school. We are funding, I believe there's about $970 million in the Austin General Fund and about $1.3 billion in AISD. They need to take care of their own distinct functions. They have separate roles and separate duties. And I do not support this commingling. I think the biggest challenge taxpayers have is we're being overtaxed in this city. The taxes are absolutely out of control because the spending is out of control, because the elected officials generally do not listen to you. They give you lip service when they talk about affordability, but when it comes time to spend your money, I've just been through another budget cycle, there is no discipline and there is no restraint when it comes to spending your money, either on AISD or on the city side. Do you know that AISD is losing enrollment? They're losing enrollment to charter schools. The charter schools have increased over the last 6 years from about 5,000 students to 18,000 students, while AISD enrollment is declining. So what is AISD's answers? We demand subsidies. Does everybody know here that you're paying $3.8 million in subsidies to AISD? Do you know how much you got from your 2% tax exemption? You got maybe 3.2 or 3.5 million. So the single subsidy to AISD was more than you got through your homestead exemption bump.
Thank you, Mr. Flannigan.
Well, there are a couple of issues when you talk about the city's interaction with the school districts. Obviously, District 6 is mostly Round Rock ISD, and it splits the rest of it with Leander and part of AISD. So any attempt that, and I've gotten pushback from the mayor's office on this, but I do not support the tax swap idea that had been floated where the city of Austin was going to somehow do this swapping expense thing with AISD. I don't support that. There's no way for that to be equitable for District 6 residents that are in other school districts. But when you're talking about after-school programs, when you're talking about the services we can provide after the school has closed, that's different. That's not education. That's Parks and Rec. We provide all kinds of recreation services, senior recreation services, pools, park services. And if we have an opportunity to keep these kids out of trouble and provide some after-school programs while their parents are working a second job, I think it's a benefit to the community. If we can keep these kids out of trouble, I think we can save a few badged officers from having to do extra work if those kids were getting into trouble. So, you know, it's not as simple as saying that there's a big firewall, because when Round Rock builds a school, and they're building a middle school and soon to be building a high school over at Pearson Ranch and Neenah, we're going to have to build the roads to support that. So the back and forth is real, and we need to make sure that we're partnering with the school districts on a leadership sense so that we don't end up with another Vandergrift 4-point situation where people are waiting 45 minutes to get through a single intersection because they didn't coordinate with the city first. And we need to make sure that anything we do for AISD schools, for low-income schools, are also offered to our Title I schools in District 6. And just because we're a suburban district doesn't mean we don't have poverty. We all know that low-income folks are being pushed to the suburbs. District 6 has some of the few remaining affordable rental units that are out there. So if we're going to offer after-school programs to at-risk youth in low-income schools, we need to make sure that they're looking at every school that serves Austin residents.
Thank you. Mr. Flannigan. We understand from information in the American Statesman that the technology and innovation community is organizing political committees to, among other things, promote tech-friendly regulations and policies at the city level. They will join other lobbyists, such as developers, neighborhood groups, environmental groups, etc., who have access to council and staff. How can the city assure transparency of all lobbyists so that the public will know who influences your decisions?
Well, I know there's a lot of conversation about the influence of lobbyists, and Councilmember Poole has done a lot of work to increase the reporting requirements and the funding limit requirements and all that kind of stuff. You know, the city of Austin has some very strong open meetings rules. Every meeting has to be in public. Every decision has to be made on camera. You're not allowed to coordinate with your colleagues behind closed doors. It's difficult sometimes to identify who a lobbyist is. Are you a lobbyist if you're talking to your council member about a pothole? I don't think that you are. If someone is paying you to talk to a council member about something that doesn't impact your life, I think that makes you a lobbyist. And sometimes it's not easy to tell the difference when you're having 10 to 15 meetings a day. So I think, you know, adding another constituent group to those that are trying to influence council, I think might be a drop in an ocean of people trying to talk to council members. Ultimately, what we're talking about is folks that have a very specific concern. I have those concerns as well. You know, you talk about the tech community. I'm a web developer. I've been doing tech work for 20 years. I understand that, you know, government moves slow by design. Because we want to make sure everyone has an opportunity to participate. And so when the tech community moves fast and government moves slow, we have to make sure that we're doing that in a way that makes sense and we're not screwing up the system in advance. And I think we've seen a little bit of that happening on council already. The kinds of decisions that could have been preventable. You know, sometimes there's a compromise. And when the folks who have decided that any compromise must fail, you often end up with the wrong decision. Sometimes you have to compromise, and the compromises over the TNCs, for example, that the mayor produced that were voted down by the more conservative members of the council could have been passed by the conservative members of council, and they didn't. And we ended up with an ordinance that hurt the tech community.
Could you please repeat that question, because there are some important concepts there, and it was a little bit convoluted. Sure. If you could repeat it, please.
We understand from information in the American Statesman that the technology and innovation community is organizing political committees to, among other things, promote tech-friendly regulations and policies at the city level. They will join other lobbyists, such as developers, neighborhood groups, environmental groups, who have access to council and staff. How can the city assure transparency of all lobbyists so that the public will know who influences your decisions?
The short answer is they cannot. You cannot, in my opinion. In my observation, especially after a year and a half of being in office and seeing how money is being thrown around all over the place. You cannot. So it's one of the reasons I supported striking the $70,000 that the mayor's budget put in for the Austin Technology Council. But we asked a budget question of exactly how many grants and how many organizations like the Austin Technology Council, Chambers of Commerce, Downtown Austin Alliance, Austin Technology Foundation, not to be confused with the Austin Technology Council. There are hundreds of these organizations getting anywhere from millions of your dollars down to tens of thousands of your dollars. Hundreds. It's just practically impossible to keep up and try to figure out if some of this money ends up being used for lobby purposes. It's effectively impossible. As far as the lobby changes that Council Member Poole had recommended, I generally don't support those because the lobby requirements do not include the most significant and the most powerful lobbyists in Central Texas, and those are the city bureaucrats. You know, I know quite a few of the lobbyists from working there for a year and a half, and I'm here to tell you, the influence of the paid lobbyist is a joke compared to the influence of the city staff, who have unlimited access to your council members anytime they want. They have a legal staff willing to write, confidence only. I've got some information in one of my handouts I'd like to get to, but I don't support this. The total of these grants are tens of millions of dollars. So you have a system out of control that you can't guarantee transparency. We have to cut these back, and we have an affordability crisis. This is a good place to stop. These organizations really are self-serving, and they're not helping the community, in my opinion.
Thank you. Mr. Zimmerman, could you outline your position on climate change and the Austin Climate Protection Plan, and what role you see Austin government playing in addressing this issue?
That's a great question. Let's talk about climate change quickly. Does anybody remember the Northeast Texas wood-burning biomass plant back in 2007? Anybody remember that? All right, there is one city council member in the history of this city that actually knows what's in that biomass contract. That's me. The 7 members that passed it unanimously on the horrific advice of city staff with scare tactics from Chicken Little saying that Manhattan's going to be 5 feet underwater unless you pay for this biomass plant. The propaganda is embarrassing that your city council members are subjected to. You had some smart people on that city council that voted 7-0 for a deal that looks like an Enron scam. You're being charged $58 million a year for that biomass boondoggle for 0 kilowatts of energy. Let me say that again. You're paying $58 million a year for 0 kilowatts of power. It is a scandal. It's a scam. And the city bureaucrats are doing everything they can to bury the scandal. And I think it should be brought up. So this is what they do with climate change. They come out and scare people. Oh, you got to vote for this wood-burning plant because it's going to be carbon neutral. That's what this propaganda does to us. It's part of the reason our Austin energy rates are out of control. Now, I'll finish with this. I had an argument with the climate scientists, and I made a remark that I'm going to repeat right now. Are you ready? The sun warms the earth, not carbon dioxide. You don't have to be as smart as a 5th grader to understand that if that sun were instantly to turn off, this entire planet would turn into an ice ball and everybody would be dead. It is the power of the sun that dominates our climate. Carbon dioxide may have a small role, but it's the sun. And the statesman said Zimmerman was mostly false.
Thank you. Mr. Flannigan.
I'm sorry. Would the audience please not participate with any sounds until the end, and then you can applaud. Thank you.
You know, it's interesting on this topic because it's such a big issue for one city to address. And I think you can look at some of the small impacts we're already experiencing. We are experiencing bigger floods off of smaller rainfall. And we are experiencing 4 years of an empty lake that then fills up overnight. You know, when you talk about climate change and you berate someone who comes to speak to council to the point that you chase them to the back of chambers and staff has to escort them from council, you're not going to get anything done. You know, we're really seeing something live and in person, and I'm so glad so many of you are here tonight because it's very clear that you can yell and scream all you want, but if you can't count to 6, if you can't get the votes, nothing will change. And you know, whether or not you want to talk about the sun on or off, it's on. The sun's not going away, and neither is climate change. And you know, no one is foolish enough to think that the city of Austin alone is going to solve such a big issue, but it's not going to get solved without us. And you can look at some of the initiatives that Austin Energy has done and that Austin Water has done that are now on par with polluting energies. The costs are on par now. That this is the type of work that Austin sets a leader. We have leadership in the world on this issue. We have leadership in solar, leadership in wind. We don't have to build huge pipelines, expensive pipelines to connect to other people's water sources. We can do a better job with gray water systems and reusable water. There are solutions, and we can address these solutions together. That's the work you want from your city council, not the work of an ideologue.
Mr. Flannigan, last year, council enacted a 6% property tax exemption, and this year it was increased to 8%. This year's 2% increase in the homestead exemption carved $3.8 million from this year's city budget. According to the City Manager Ott, it took away the kind of surpluses that the City of Austin has been accustomed to coming out of the recession. It was clear that not all priorities could be fully funded. What changes in the budget would you propose to be able to fund the priorities in the future?
Well, it's a very complicated question, and I've been paying close attention to at least the public work sessions. Of course, I don't have the privilege of making up what happened in executive session. But when you think about the homestead exemption specifically, you know, there's been some reporting about my position on that hasn't been the same, because my belief on the homestead exemption is that it's a red herring. We could do a 20% homestead exemption, but it doesn't stop the city from raising the tax rate. And you know, this 8% homestead exemption that we have, the last report I saw, and again, this all happened yesterday, is that the new tax rate is almost 8% higher, or that the impact is 8% higher. So it's a wash. If we're not having the hard conversation about how we fund these things moving forward, it won't matter what the homestead exemption was. I do think it's a good idea. If we're going to do a homestead exemption, I think we should be paying more attention to the senior and disabled homestead exemption, the flat rate one that council went from $80,000 to $8,250. I think Councilmember Gallo's proposal to go to $91,000 was probably a good one, but you couldn't do that and the 8% general homestead at the same time. Now, and again, you know, 2 minutes is not long enough to go into all the different little things you talk about in a budget, but the one thing I do want to say is it is ridiculous that we're going to do a $3 billion budget in 2 months. I am proposing that we go into biannual budgeting and rolling departmental reviews so that we can do the deep dive as council members into precisely the services that we're providing and if those services are still relevant. It's highly possible that there's a service that the police department provides or that Parks provides or that Health and Human Services provided that made sense 10 years ago that's just in the rolling budget from year to year. And because this annual do it all in 2 months process compresses it to the point that you can't have the conversation, we never have the opportunity to deep dive. And I was glad to hear that the mayor said he was going to start extending departmental reviews starting in November. So you have an opportunity to decide which council member from District 6 is going to be the one in those reviews.
Well, thank you.
Mr. Zimmerman.
We have now over 13,000 government employees, and what's been driving our costs really are the escalation in the number of FTEs, the full-time employees that we have. Does anybody know that our contributions to the employee pensions have increased from 8% to 18%? If you have any people that have been in business or had contributing 401ks and what have
Mr. Zimmerman, they can only raise their hand. They can't say anything.
You only get maybe 6%, 8%. Sometimes you get a 10%. But city employees are getting 18% contributions to pensions. These are very expensive. We have escalating health care costs. We have a city government. What they do when it's time to increase salaries every year, they have a trade organization that compares salaries in cities to salaries in other cities. So the cities have this little game they play where the cities compare salaries to other cities. Guess what happens? We have wage inflation. We have wages going up in municipalities that far outstrip the people that are paying the bills. Now, every time we have these budget cycles, what's interesting about the budget cycle, to explain that, you are not there. When you talk about your cost drivers and how all your health care costs are going up, you have costs that are going up. In addition to your costs that go up, you have city taxes, utilities, and fees. So what happens to your city council under the current system and the current city management? Your council members are subjected to about 3 months of bombardment by city bureaucrats complaining about how their costs are going up. I always say, look, our constituents' costs are going up. They're complaining about affordability in the city. That voice is heard for about 60 seconds, and then for several more months, it's we need more money, we need more money, we need more money, we need more money. Guess what happens? The bureaucracies get their pay increases, you get poorer, the affordability problem gets worse, and nobody listens to you. I am your voice on council.
Thank you. We have a few questions from the audience that we will give you, and because we are a little behind on time, let's have a 1-minute answer on these, please. Will you support a 10-year extension of the Anderson Mill? Oh, I'm sorry, it goes to Mr. Zimmerman. Will you support a 10-year extension of the Anderson Mill Limited District up for renewal in 2018?
You want me to go first?
Yes, sir.
Short answer is yes, because the majority of people that I've talked to, and that's been a bunch, have been supportive of this. I think the risk to this is there is some money in the bank for the Anderson Mill Limited District. If the city decides, and by that I mean the city bureaucracy, if they decide to abolish the Anderson Mill Limited District, they will confiscate the money in the bank, they will take over the parks, and they're free to do whatever they want, and I guarantee you they will shut down pools, they will stop taking care of the grounds. You will be very, very unhappy with what happens if the city terminates your limited district. I don't believe that you're allowed to have a vote. You should. You should be able to have a vote on whether the city abolishes your limited district, but I don't think you have that vote. And come to think of it, you didn't get a vote on whether you wanted to be annexed or not. Come to think of it, nobody gets to vote on whether they are annexed or not because they would vote no. So I think there are legislative changes coming in 2017 that will finally give people the right to vote.
Mr. Flannigan.
I'm glad to see that there's some agreement on supporting the Anderson Mill Limited District. That's news to me. I have supported the Limited District for many years. It does an excellent job as a steward of the money that it collects. Its fees as property taxes are actually lower than other neighborhoods when you're paying an HOA fee, and I think we could all recognize that the Anderson Mill Park system is one of the finest maybe in the city. It's also important because the Anderson Mill Limited District board members are elected, and if you as a community decided you didn't want the limited district, you could elect board members that didn't want the limited district. And that is how voting works. Just as you get to vote on who your council member is and how they're going to represent your voice, because it's your voice, not mine, it's yours, and you have a choice on who represents your voice and how your voice is represented.
Thank you. Mr. Flannigan, can you tell us, do you support Austin's zero waste goals?
Yes. The thing about zero waste, no matter what you hear about it, is if we have more than zero waste and if we're not working to reduce the waste, we're going to have to build another landfill. Where do you want me to put it? That's not going to be fun and it's not going to be cheap. I went and visited a recycling center a couple of months ago, or about a month ago, and I watched what was an amazing operation of recycling materials, paper goods, plastic goods, and the revenues that can be generated from that. And the mayor has an interesting plan for introducing or inviting recyclable material manufacturers to bring good manufacturing jobs to town based off of the materials that we're generating right here in Austin. And I know that the composting thing that council just approved is somewhat controversial, but I think it's important to note that if you do the composting, you can save that $5 by getting a smaller trash can. So at the end of the day, you can make your costs the same and do better for the environment.
Mr. Zimmerman.
Thank you. On my flyer that you can pick up on the way out, one of my points here is that I will seek to put out for bid to privatize trash and recycling. And what would happen if we privatized trash and recycling is we would pay a lot less and we would get a lot more. I think the zero waste goals are utopian, they're unaffordable, and they're unsustainable. There are some economic realities that we have some, speaking of ideologues, we do have some very serious problems with ideologues in city government. And in ideology, they think, wouldn't it be great if we could have zero waste? And I'm like, well, actually, our constituents don't want to pay for it. It's unaffordable and it's unsustainable. We should put the trash and recycling up to private bid. We would get better service. By the way, some of the limited district agreements, and I think it's true of Anderson Mill, they don't have to pay for and put up with the City of Austin trash service. I have yet to talk to a single person that would rather have Austin trash.
Mr. Zimmerman, we're going to ask one more question. That's all we have time for. And since we started a little late, we're still going over time, but because we'll have closing statements after this. In the City of Austin, is the City of Austin's vision, Imagine Austin, a vision for District 6? What vision for District 6 will be acceptable to both downtown Austin and District 6?
This is a great question. Imagine Austin, I've gone through this document, and it's very interesting. It reminds me of Europe. I used to live in Europe. I lived in Eastern Europe for the better part of a year. There are people that like this urban lifestyle. But I'll tell you what I support. You know what my vision is? My vision is liberty. My vision is that you get to choose. Some people like to live in a dense urban environment where they can walk and bike and have a lot of stuff close in. They don't mind living in a high-rise, efficiency place. Some people can afford that. But there are others that prefer some space. They want to be in a suburb. They like to have a street in front and a yard in the back for their dog or for their kids to play. So, my vision is liberty. And we don't have that concept in the city of Austin, unfortunately. So I'm glad that you asked this question. It's a very, very important question for what direction you want Austin to go. Do you want more centralized planning and control and bureaucrats and lobbyists, or do you want choices and liberty?
Mr. Flannigan.
Thank you. Some of you may be familiar with the phrase, a vision without a plan is a hallucination. And when we talk about Imagine Austin, that is a plan. And the plan gets implemented partially through the work of council, partially through the Code Next process that's happening. And we have to be very vigilant about what happens with Code Next so that it doesn't apply to District 6 the same set of rules that it will apply to downtown. And the challenge for us is to make sure that our voice is heard, that it's not ignored, so that when they come up with however the zoning and the rules and the land use rules apply, that they make sense for our district, because they'll have to be different, and that they make sense for downtown and north central and south and southwest and east, because each part of town faces unique challenges, and we can make sure that those unique challenges are reflected in the Code Next process and in the implementation of Imagine Austin.
Thank you. We started the opening statements with Mr. Flannigan, so we'll start the closing statements with 2 minutes. 2 minutes.
2 minutes, okay.
Zimmerman.
Thank you very much again. Thank you, everyone, for coming. I want to thank my opponent, Mr. Flannigan. One thing I like about this race is there is a lot of daylight between us. We have very different ideologies. You really have a choice here, It's amazing. You don't get that choice very much. There's a lot of difference between us. I'm going to spend a minute or two here reading something. This is very, very important to my point of why city council members so often do not represent you. The context of what I'm going to read is an attorney letter that was given to me after I went with one of my constituents to an administrative hearing for water. Now, this is the city lawyer talking to me. Councilmember Zimmerman, per my conversation with your staff, we'd like to share a potential legal concern with you. We understand you attended an Austin water rate proceeding with a constituent, at which the constituent and city staff presented their respective sides to the presiding administrative hearing judge. Please keep in mind that City Code Section 2.7-62D prohibits city officials from representing directly or indirectly any other person in any action or proceeding against the interest of the city. As you know, we make an effort to bring potential legal risks to the attention of individual council members in the interest of minimizing risk and assisting members with issue spotting. This email is consistent with this practice, and we welcome the opportunity to discuss the matter further with you if you have any questions. So my response to that was to schedule more hearings with my constituents. I represent constituents, not the city lawyers. I'm outraged. You should be outraged that behind closed doors, the lawyers that you pay for are intimidating your elected council members. That is the truth of the matter. I'm going to bring change to that. I campaigned hard on replacing the city manager. I deserve a little bit of credit for his departure. I appreciate that. Thank you for coming.
Well, you do have a choice in this election. And I think the choice is pretty clear based on what we've seen here tonight. There are two ways to represent. You can be a bully, and you can yell, and you can scream, and you can hire lawyers. You can force the city to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars defending you against a lawsuit. You can break the law. You know, we haven't heard the phrase rule of law yet tonight. That's something that we used to hear at these debates. Council members set the policy, and if you don't like the policy, you change the policy. You don't then bring the lawyers in. It costs money, it takes time, you often fail. I do not want to see unlimited campaign finance dollars from outside of the city injected into our local elections. We're now spending hundreds of thousands of dollars defending that lawsuit. I don't want to see the will of the voters overturned. I want to work with you. I want your voice to be heard from you to council. The city manager left after staying longer to defend his reputation. He would have left earlier. In the conversation about how to replace the city manager, it was said that you don't need to be involved. Your council member will handle it for you. Your voice is not important. It's why you elected a council member. This is not representation. This is not the type of city council that I want to have, and I don't think it's the type of city council District 6 needs. Our voice has been ignored forever in this town. It's being ignored right now by fact, by citation of existing council members. And I have a record of success, even in this political climate, of getting stuff done for District 6. It's the type of work I want to continue with your support. It's why I'm asking for your vote, and it's why I believe that we can fix Austin together.
Okay, now everybody can applaud. Go.
Good job.
We could tell it was in you. It was in you. I do want to thank the candidates for taking time to do this, and I want to thank all of the League of Women Voters volunteers, especially and also the Ethics Review Commission and all the staff that sets this up. Especially also thank the Hope Presbyterian Church for allowing us here to set up in this room this evening. The League hopes that this forum has helped you become better informed about these individuals who wish to represent you on the Austin City Council. This is a very important election, and your participation is vital to our democracy. As a reminder to the candidates, the voters' guide questions are due this week. Okay, and the League does publish that voters' guide. It is a nonpartisan voters' guide for the Austin American Statesman to come out on Sunday, October 23rd, just before early voting begins on October 24th. It will also be online on the League website at lwvaustin.org. And Election Day is November 8th, and you may vote at any polling place that has a sign that says vote here. If you do not have a photo ID, you may bring other identifying things like a utility bill in your name or your voter registration card. The League website has information regarding what is required this year with the changes. There are some great pamphlets on the table in the back that tell you about early voting, what ID you need, and the location of the mega voting centers. Travis County expects very large crowds at the polls and encourages you to vote early. One of the brochures that they put out at ivoteearly.com has the locations of the early voting mega centers for those of you that are in a hurry. Please, thank you again for your attendance at this forum, and do vote early. Thank you.